Were you ever, like, reticent to, like, be the thing of nightmares?
I did my first con in New York. Outside in the rain, there was 2 blocks of black leather-clad girls in corsets and punk rock makeup and guys with mohawks. Those were the Freddy fans standing in the rain. And I went, well, we're onto something here. Hi, Katee. Can you hear me now?
I can. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy to see you again. We met many years ago at a convention.
Well, actually, I'm going to tell you a story that predates that. And you know, I know you have so many millions of fans from Battlestar Galactica and Riddick and Mandalorian, all those cowboys that want to be frisked by you from Longmire.
Who are usually 80-year-old men, by the way.
Yes. Hanging out at El Farol on Canyon Road. At any rate, well, you had Lou Diamond Phillips to protect you, my old buddy. But way back, my wife and I were in love with a show called The Education of Max Bickford. And I was flying from New York to the West Coast, and you were 2 seats ahead of me, and you were all curled up like a little kitten. And you had your Linus blanket with you, and I think you had headphones on, and you were dozing on the red eye, but I had to confront you because I thought you were so incredible on that show, and your work was so haunting. And that's the early 2000s, and it was network, but your work was so ahead of the curve on that. You were unlike anything else on network television then. And I was so, not only smitten with you, but I was incredibly impressed by your acting work on that show. And that's when I was hooked by Katee, long before your huge science fiction stardom, I had been a fan. So I just wanted you to know that.
Oh man, thank you so much.
But that was our first meeting. Yeah.
That was, God, I was like 20. I was a kid. I think that had I had any idea what I was actually doing, I think it probably would have changed my acting style so incredibly that I think because I just was flying by the seat of my pants and I was a terrified kid. I was just like, what am I doing here?
Well, you're still very young, but when you get to be my age, you look back, and I remember now some performances I did as a child or when I was very young, and how pure that work was in a strange way, because we don't know enough technique then.
Right.
Or we haven't seen ourselves 1,000 times on playback or in dailies or in ADR sessions. And we're not haunted by, what we look like on the big screen or our vanity. And I think sometimes that's some of our best work in a strange way. Whether it's accidental or just innocent or not, I don't think that matters. I think it's like when every once in a while you'll see a child actor, that kid that was on Adolescence.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, you see that work and you go, oh. And then maybe you remember a little bit something that you did way back, and you realize, well, I was operating really pure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's I think that when you're young, or when I was young, I just had no other way of knowing how to do what was required at work except to just be. And that, like you said, that it's such a pure thing when you're so uninhibited and you are so young you don't even realize you should care what people think. And it's I had a friend of mine tell me, because I'd never seen Battlestar Galactica, And he said that he goes, oh man, you gotta watch it. Like, you're on fire. And I was like, wow, I've never, and I think that sort of perfectly summed up like my acting style as a young kid was just be on fire.
Well, there's also, I think we have or children, young, even when we're very young, we still have some sincerity and some earnestness left that we don't have to act it then.
Yeah.
It's still real. You know, it just sort of comes out, I don't know, for lack of a better way of saying it, just comes out more real.
Yeah.
Back then, because we don't know how to act earnestness yet. It's still, we can still tap into it.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to a question that I'm so curious about, because by the time you did Nightmare on Elm Street, you'd been working for a very, very, very long time. So what was it that made you want to be an actor? Like, what was it? A specific thing that you saw? Was it a person? Was it a play? What was it about performing that you loved so much?
You know, it's difficult because I'd love to give, you know, a kind of intellectual, artistic response to that, and you know, talk about De Niro or Brando or the British actors I worshipped, like Tom Courtenay and Alan Bates, Albert Finney, you know, and these were all phases I went through, and I went through the James Dean Brando. Hell, I liked a guy from television when I was very young who really influenced me, named Michael Parks, who later in life became a Tarantino kind of go-to character actor. But it began with me, and I remember being influenced as a child a little bit. I thought he was wonderful, Danny Kaye. You know, and that's so far back in my childhood. Some Saturday matinee film I had gone to, or something like that. But I remember I had always had older friends, and I had older friends, teenagers that had cars. You know, it sounds like a Drew Barrymore movie. You know, boys with cars. But I always had. So I was on a double date at the age of 13 with this actress that I had a crush on, and we went to a matinee of West Side Story, the original OG West Side Story, at the Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. And I can remember being so moved by that. Now, I wasn't a musical theater geek, and I wasn't necessarily a theater geek, although I had worked as a child actor on stage. But I remember like snapping my fingers up the aisle after West Side Story ended. And I wanted to be a shark, or I wanted to be a jet. And all four of us had been completely transported by that film and the music and the giant big screen. And we snapped our fingers out into the lobby, you know, half dancing, you know, half skipping, in that last sort of second, or that early moment of adolescence that I had, and into the sunlight. And that moment of transportation really, really influenced me. And so I kind of remember that. And that same summer, I had done Pinocchio in a children's theater, kind of paraprofessional children's theater. And I had a little Tyrolean vest and little funny shorts and a putty nose and my little, you know, silly hat with a feather in it. And I was being chased by, I want to be politically correct here, Native Americans across the stage. And they shot, you know, rubber-tipped arrows at me. And then I would run back, and I had the arrows stuck in me because, of course, I'm a puppet. I'm a wooden puppet. I'm Pinocchio. And I had pieces of styrofoam hidden in the vest and pieces of styrofoam hidden in my shorts. And every night I added more arrows to increase the laugh, because the audience is in on the joke. Pinocchio's made of wood. He can't be hurt by arrows. And finally, I had seen the Billy Wilder film, Some Like It Hot, and there's a shot in that with the old comedian Joey Brown dancing with, I think it's Jack Lemmon, dressed in drag. And he dips Jack Lemmon and looks at the camera and he had, a rose with a rose stem in his mouth. Well, I'd seen that just recently with my parents, Some Like It Hot, and I stole it and I put the arrow in my mouth and I would do a take to the audience and I got this huge laugh. And it was phenomenally addicting, like being a rock star. And at the end of that show, the great talk show host, Steve Allen, came backstage. And he had a friend whose daughter was in the show. I think she was playing Tiger Lily or something. And he asked to see the kid playing Pinocchio. Where's that kid that's playing Pinocchio? And with his big giant glasses on, he found me, and he was tall. And he literally put his hands on my shoulders and said, kid, you're really funny. You can do this if you want to. And I'm like 13 years old. So that getting the laughs, feeling like a rock star, getting that laugh in the exact same place, being transported by West Side Story, and the magic of the choreography and the music all in one summer. Yeah. I think that's really the kindling that really made me know that this is something I was going to do. I wish I could say it was because I did Sackhoff or I wanted to be James Dean and later on, all those things are true, Shakespeare and everything. But back then, it was as simple as a double date at West Side Story, getting laughs as Pinocchio and a compliment and I knew who Steve Allen was. We loved his late night talk show. Katee, he had this little comedy sketch group like a Saturday Night Live ensemble, and they all became stars. Tim Conway, who went on to McHale's Navy and the Carol Burnett Show, and Louis Nye, and Tom Poston, who went on to the old Newhart Show. All these wonderful guys that were in this comedy ensemble. Don Knotts, Don Knotts was on that show, and they were the comedy ensemble. So as a kid, as a 12 or 13-year-old boy, I knew who Steve Allen was, and I knew about these great comics working on his late night talk show. And to get that compliment and that reinforcement, and a lot of teachers and professionals now are cautious about giving that to a kid.
I know.
Whether they're in music or whether they have writing potential or anything else, because their moms and dads want them to, go into tech, or law or something safe,
Yeah.
And it's so strange that back then to get those moments of confidence. I don't know, when you were really young, did anybody ever take you aside and give you that little kind of blessing that really helped you with confidence?
I think not so much necessarily like when I was very young growing up, but when I was 16 years old, I was cast locally in Portland in a Lifetime movie of the week. And I had auditioned. I'd never auditioned for anything like this in my life, but my mom helped me memorize the dialogue. And the director of that, I had 2 scenes. That's it. I was Taft-Hartley into the union. But the director of that pulled my mom aside one day when she was coming to pick me up and said, there's something about her. If you can get her to California, I'll introduce her to my entire team. And that help from Sam Pillsbury, who had directed the Free Willy movies, and that man gave me the career that I have. Because when I flew, my mom took me to LA. She trusted him. He was sincere and kind and fatherly, and he and his wife took us to dinner or made dinner at their home and really included my mother in this entire thing, introduced me to my agent, my manager, my lawyer, everyone, and was just off to the races from that moment. And that him believing in me, I don't think had that moment not happened, I don't know if I would have ever had the courage to move to California. Who knows?
Well, who knows? Experiences like that are far more rare than we realize. And I think that, that's it's like you have to thank him in your next acceptance speech.
I absolutely do.
Yeah.
Well, it's similar to what you were saying, though. I actually loved your answer, even though it wasn't that you were inspired by these great, playwrights or something. Because it's so pure and honest, and I'm so fascinated by sliding doors in life,
Yeah.
And what I love about your summer was there were multiple things that solidified this feeling in you that made sure that this is what you did. And I love that.
Well, I've more than overcompensated with theater snobbery since then, and for years, all I wanted was, to do avant-garde theater or the classics and have a little black box theater somewhere and do new and produce new playwrights. And it took me a while, to make peace in Hollywood. And at some point, I think I'd probably done a dozen movies or so, but Wes Craven and my success, especially my monetary success, has been as a result of horror films.
Yeah.
And the genre has been very, very good to me. And as science fiction has been so welcoming for you. And, it's not something I'd ever thought about, or I thought I'd never thought about. But then I remembered when Wes Craven told me to respect the genre of horror, I remembered as a little boy how much I loved it, how much I loved, the matinee movies, horror movies, or the Hammer films, and that I even, and I tell this story a lot, but there had been a coffee table book that my uncle had, and it called The Movies, and it had a whole section in it on 1930s horror, as well as the silent film star Lon Chaney, and it had this fold-out page of all of the different makeups he had worn. Now, I don't know how latent into the back of my brain that buried itself like some kind of brain worm, but I remember being fascinated. And every time I went to my godfather, my uncle's house, I would look at that page and look at all the different Lon Chaney makeups. Of course, they called him the man of 1,000 faces. Yeah. But I would look at that, and I don't think I was inspired, but I was amazed by it. I mean, it was just this wonderful thing that you can do that. You can make yourself change. And to this day, I literally remembered this about 10, 15 years ago, and I wonder if perhaps that's one of the reasons I said yes to Wes back in 1984. If that challenge of the makeup was something very deep in me. In theater, you have to do your own makeup.
Yes.
And it's required. It's a union requirement that you know how to put on mutton chops and a mustache and fake eyebrows and highlight and shadow. And I think I did have that respect, for special effects makeup and all of that. But I often wonder if that had been something way deep in the back of my mind that, made me say yes to Wes, because I wanted to somehow meet that challenge because I loved Lon Chaney all those years ago,
This episode is brought to you by Masterclass. You know that feeling when your brain is just done, right? You've been in go mode all day and suddenly you realize you haven't done one thing that actually filled you up. That's when I personally opened Masterclass. It's become just this little reset, something that inspires me instead of drains me. With Masterclass, you can learn from the best to become your best. Plans start at just $10 a month, billed annually, and you get unlimited access to over 200 classes taught by incredible leaders, artists, and creators, people who've actually lived what they teach. I've been taking the Shonda Rhimes class on storytelling, and it genuinely changed how I approached my own creative work. She talks about trusting your voice even when it feels scary, and that really, for me, hits home. The classes fit into any schedule. You can even download them to watch online, and honestly, they just make you want to keep growing. Right now, our listeners get an additional 15% off any annual membership at masterclass.com/Katee. That's masterclass.com/Katee for 15% off. Go learn something that reminds you what you're capable of. This episode is brought to you by Rula. Therapy is one of those things that I think most of us could benefit from. I mean, I know that I do. It has helped me handle the chaos of my life, work and parenting at the same time, all of it. But trying to find a therapist who actually takes your insurance, that used to be a whole separate stress. Rula takes that frustration out of the equation. They work with over 100 insurance plans, so most people pay around $15 a session and sometimes even less. It's real therapy with licensed professionals, and appointments can be available as soon as tomorrow. They also don't just throw you at the first person with an opening. You tell them what you're looking for, and they curate a list of in-network therapists who actually fit your goals and personality. They say it's that simple, fast, and that it works. Thousands of people are already using Rula to get affordable, high-quality therapy that's actually covered by your insurance. Visit rula.com/Sackhoff to get started. After you sign up, you'll be asked how you heard about them. Please support our show and let them know that we sent you. That's RULA.com/Sackhoff. You deserve mental health care that works with you, not against your budget. Hey everyone, if you haven't subscribed to our show, make sure you do that right now. You hit that button. It is the only way to get alerts and know what's coming and what's up. Back to the episode. You said something really interesting that you sort of fought against sort of the place where you found yourself and you wanted to do these serious plays and everything. Was that because of did you always take the genre seriously when Wes said that to you, or was that something that came to you years after playing the character?
It began during the success and during the filming of the franchise. You know, we did 8 movies in the first 10 years.
Yeah, I know.
Nicely spaced out from 84 to 94. Then there was a break, and then Freddy versus Jason. But at some point in the mid-'80s, late 80s, I really began to listen to the fans and read some of the fan mail and, you know, talk to people in college that were writing theses and papers on Nightmare on Elm Street and what it meant to them or to the culture. And so I started to respect it and delve into it more. But I had always reacted well to what I guess you want to call A-list horror, you know, Rosemary's Baby,
right.
The Innocents with Deborah Carr. But I'd also had that latent fanboy in me that loved, you know, the giant ants and them, and, you know, loved a good Godzilla poster and loved some great sci-fi, you know. So I'd always had that, but I kind of buried it under years of Shakespeare and Moliere and George Bernard Shaw and Sackhoff and doing new plays and everything. I just sort of forgotten it. It was just buried, but it was reignited again. It was like rekindled by that advice from Wes and also things that the fans told me.
So walk me through that, actually, because from your moment that you first get the script to establishing the character and finding that character in you, because the character of Freddy is so deep. Like there's so much there. There's so much texture. There's so much nuance. It is a beautiful character study, actually, I believe. And so I would love to know how that came to you and what your conversations with Wes were in the beginning about what his ideas were, what your ideas were, and if they were similar.
Well, sometimes I would just look for triggers, things that would trigger Freddy. And, you know, there's a real primal thing to it. Like Jason is afraid of water, Freddy is afraid of fire. And that's a pretty primal, easy thing to have. And I had found the voice externally. Sometimes I don't know about you. I read a script and I can either see myself in that role or I can't. Mm-hmm. And if I can see myself in it, it makes it a lot easier to prep. if I can't, I kind of struggle, and I might struggle working from the outside in sometimes, and sometimes from the inside out. With Freddy, I found the voice externally during an experimental makeup session, and I just got poked with a glue brush that had been gotten crusty and stale and been used too much. And I was poked too close to my eye, and I swore, but I was looking at myself in the mirror at the same time, and I was probably 95% complete in the makeup. And the voice that came out of me when I swore in the profanity went for Freddy. It worked for Freddy.
Yeah.
And so that's where I found the voice. Then I was probably 10 days into it. And again, still working externally. And you know that thing sometimes they talk to you about in certain acting classes where you can use animals sometimes.
Yes.
As that might work for some actors as a way to approach a part. And I was using, I don't know, I think the way cats move. You know how cats and hummingbirds, they're not really in the same time space place that the rest of us are. And so I knew Freddy was in a dream landscape, so I wanted to move him kind of cat-like whenever I could without getting caught dancing, And so I was still working externally. And I've told this story a lot. I apologize, Katee, but
that's okay, because I've never heard it.
Okay. So I'd probably been called at 4:30 a.m. that morning, and I was probably ready at 7:30. And I had done some long shots from let's say, I don't know, 7 or 8 in the morning until 11. And I had my first break, maybe it was noon. And they were touching me up in the makeup room. It's the old Desilu Studios on Cahuenga in Hollywood. And I was in an old barber's chair. And it's about lunch hour. And in waltzed Johnny Depp and Heather Langenkamp, both of them at the absolute height of their youth and beauty. Mm. And I know people hate the word moist, but they were dewy and moist and young. And they had,
we use moist in Star Wars all the time. The dewy, moist look of the girls on Star Wars. It's because it's youthful.
And the eyelash youthful. Yeah, it didn't start out as a creepy word.
No.
And that's what Heather and Johnny were. I mean, they literally did not need makeup or powder. And Johnny had that perfect dry quiff hair going. And they would come waltzing in and sit down. And that particular day, I'd had a long morning. And I was still, having second thoughts about doing the project. A little bit, and it was hot. It was summer. The 84 Olympics were going on, and it was a hot, smoggy summer day. And I was getting touched up again with one of those crusty brushes. And I looked over, and the makeup girl had given a gift to Johnny and to Heather. And they were these little pink plastic battery-operated fans that everybody has now at Coachella. Only this is 1984, and it was to keep them dry. The little ingenue and the juvenile, here to pamper them and keep them dry because it's so hot outside.
So hot.
And I'm sitting over there getting basted in KY jelly and Vaseline so that I pick up the light, with my pussy sores.
God forbid you get dried out.
God forbid anybody give me a little pink fan. And I'm 30 years old. I've done a dozen movies, starred in half of them, and I've, no respect. And for a second, I was angry, and I was so jealous of Johnny and Heather, young and beautiful. They had their whole life and careers ahead of them. Had I made a wrong turn by saying yes to this horror movie? And I went, I can use that. That's that's a synapse. This moment, I can find it again. I've experienced it now legitimately. I can hook onto this. I can fire that synapse anytime I need to, when I'm chasing them around the set, when I'm holding them down underneath the covers on the bed, when I'm, circumcising their face with my blade. Mm-hmm. And so I realized that I have this actual emotional response that now I can tap into. And it's a shorthand, it's a trick actors use, but it's very, very valid. It's an equivalent thing that I could substitute for Freddy's. What is Freddy? Freddy hates youth. Freddy kills children. Youth of the future, youth and innocence, Johnny and Heather. So I had that in my pocket for the rest of the series. I could conjure that. And that would be my sort of shorthand to get into that part of Freddy. And then the jokes, I found a way to justify the jokes was Freddy wasn't young anymore. Freddy couldn't access that. Freddy was never cool. He was never part of that repartee or that slang. So he could take their slang and the pop culture references and rub it in their faces. And that's how I found access to that, to doing that with the jokes.
I love that you sort of found him as you were working through the project too, because I think that I had just mentioned this a while ago in regard to Mandalorian and the character in season 3, and that I was working my way through her and trying to find her that season as we were going. And I was concerned about it because I'd never, remembered having to do that. I always remembered finding characters quite quickly and not really having to search for them that much. But I was doing it while we were filming, and I was like, oh gosh, and I was really intimidated by it. So I love the fact that you're also talking about that, because I've come to realize that it's actually completely fine to not know everything about a character and have all of your motivations and all of your decisions made from the beginning, and to be finding a character throughout. So I love that you did that, and that you were using external things around you as well. That's so cool.
Well, it's especially important because how many times have you done prep and then had to throw it out?
Right.
Like I've had scenes in cars, smoking a cigarette, sitting shotgun in a car. And you can kind of see that, and you kind of know there's a certain way to play that. You play a lot of it out front. You have to find the beats when you want to look over at the person drive. And then they get to the set, and instead it's a walk and talk. You go, oops, well,
yes.
I shouldn't have preconceived that. But it's interesting you were talking about Mandalorian, because I have a little wonderful Mandalorian story to share with you that you're part of. You're part of this.
Oh.
We were at a convention together, you and I, and the late, great Carl Weathers. And I was having lunch with both of you at one of those big round tables, and your team was coming in and out. I think you might have had to do an interview during your lunch hour that day, and they were rushing you a little bit, but you were really having a very deep, very focused heart-to-heart with Carl. So this must have been maybe within the first couple of episodes of Mandalorian. And of course, Carl's the star of Mandalorian. Carl also was the director, the house director. And Carl was talking to you like a dad and giving you comfort. And I remember him saying to you something like, Katee, and he said the name of your DP, your cameraman.
Yeah.
And he said, Katee, he's going to make you look like $1 million. You never have to worry about this or that or this. And he was telling you other people to rely on, that he really trusted on the crew. And you were like a little kid. I mean, here I'm looking at Be Still My Heart, my crush, Katee. And you were there, and you looked like a little 12-year-old kid sitting on the floor listening to her dad give you advice. And God love him, Carl's gone now, and he was the biggest, strongest, healthiest son of a gun I ever knew. And I've been all over the world with Carl. I've been with Carl in Paris and London and Germany and New York, and Carl's always picking the restaurant. I've walked behind Carl in airports and I couldn't keep up with my little roller bag, and I would look at him from behind in a pair of shorts and a hoodie, and he's ripped. There wasn't an ounce of, you couldn't pinch an inch of fat on him, and he, the healthiest guy I know, and he's gone now, and it's like I miss him every day. Every time I do a show, I miss, because Carl used to like find great takeout and barbecue places and bring it in, and we'd all go up to his room and share the barbecue. But I remember that moment with you sitting there, and you're a huge star by the time you signed on to Mandalorian, but you were so open to him, and you look like a little kid, and you probably had to rush off and do Fox News or something, during your lunch hour. But you just were devoted to Carl's advice, and he was so kind to you. He was like, was he kind of like a big brother on that show?
He was. First of all, I'm so sorry for your loss. He had such a lust for life and learning. He used to say, "What am I going to learn today?" And so that's some advice that I always had in me, but I really took to heart when working with Carl, was what am I going to learn today? And to put my ego aside and let somebody who has done it longer, who has done it with great success, lead me to where I need to go, and get out of my own way. And that is what Carl was like. And that doesn't mean that we didn't, disagree with each other. Oof, Carl and I, like we never gotten any, verbal altercations or anything, but we would talk each other's heads off about why the other one was wrong about a decision, on set.
And that's great though. I think that stuff's great. Yeah.
Yeah. We had a lot of fun together, and I'm sorry that you've lost your friend, because he was a wonderful person.
Well, Carl had this incredible memory, and Carl and I both paid our dues together in the very early 70s, going right down to the wire for huge projects, be it a Kojak or a movie of the week or things like that. And so you get a couple of drinks in Carl, and we would share horror stories about that moment of time. But, Carl, on Mandalorian, you had to also deal with the fact that poor Carl was split focus, actor and director, and I can't even imagine what that's like. I would not want to do that.
Not only that, the dialogue on that show, it was so intensive, and also things you would never normally say, which makes it 10 times harder to memorize. And so he's doing 3 very difficult things: acting, trying to memorize that dialogue, and directing at the same time. It's not easy.
Well, oftentimes we're called upon to sort of spit out a lot of exposition, especially when you're a regular on a show. And I remember, when Kiefer Sutherland did 24, and you shared in that a lot. But Kiefer had tons of exposition he had to throw away, and he figured that kind of whispery style to do it. And many times that meant they had to come in closer on him, so even though he was the star of the show, he got even maybe an extra set of coverage in close-ups. But it also made it easier for the audience to follow the plot, because he was pitching plot, he was pitching that exposition in that whispery way. But then after that, after 24, there were half a dozen actors that had similar roles on shows on television and cable, and they were all whispering.
They're all learning the Kiefer technique.
The Kiefer technique. Yeah.
Screw volume and diction.
We're going to whisper everything. Yeah.
Everything. Because then if you don't move your mouth, you don't have to match it in ADR. You could say anything. My mouth is so distinct when it moves that I'm like, oh my God, how am I ever going to match that in the booth?
Well, I worked with an actress back in the 80s. She will remain nameless now. She was a television star, but she had this great trick of turning her back on the camera in parts of the scene she didn't want to get the obligatory leading lady close-up. And then she would pivot and hit her mark and catch the light in her eyes, right where she wanted to be covered, right where she wanted them to come in or push in. And it was hard to act with her, but then when you would see, I'd go home on Friday night and watch the show, and there she was, and she was controlling the cut.
Yes, I've worked with many a leading man who have figured that out, and I still can't figure it out. So your movement is such a huge part of that character, and also on stage. How did you find the movements? You said you were very cat-like about him, but there's also this urgency and this pouncing thing that I guess is very cat-like as well. But was that something did you work on that movement for him in the mirror? How did you find his move? Because the way he moves is terrifying.
Well, coming from the theater, I was very strong physically. I'd been a gymnast for a while, and I was an athlete. I was a champion swimmer, and a lot of Little League. So I had some tricks, accumulatively over the years, especially from gymnastics, balance tricks and stuff. And I danced in a couple of shows. I was always in the back row, but I'd done How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And I was in a huge, very successful run of Godspell. And I had to do some kind of dancing in that. They might call it character dancing. So what happened on Nightmare was, under all that makeup and standing in front of the surreal landscape of the Nightmare sets and scenery and lighting, especially the lighting. You walk on a set and everything is red and blue or red and green. It's not real. It's not reality lighting. And so I would sometimes kind of paint myself into the frame. And that, knowing that the set and the scenery were exaggerated and the camera angle was exaggerated, I felt liberated. And under all that makeup, I felt free to borrow some tricks from the theater. Whether it was just leaning a little bit irregularly, whether it was walking with a more pronounced foot over foot step, which is something you do in surfing that I do in surfing. So it's a different kind of, it's not a way anybody really walks.
Right.
But it can kind of work. I mean, you can catch Cary Grant doing it a little bit, in some films, and he was a gymnast too. But it's just a trick. But it also gives you instantly buys you a 3/4. If they're pushing in on you, it immediately rakes your shoulders on camera. And it also, because it is a bit dance-like, it kind of physically reminds you and gives you confidence to move perhaps a little differently than reality, a little differently than you normally would with gesture or something. You've had to hold guns a lot, Katee, especially on Longmire, but... And has it ever happened to you when you're working with a guest director and you're getting your freeze shot, the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They stack you and Lou Diamond Phillips up really cool or something, but you have that shot. And have you ever had the DP or the director ask you to hold the gun on an unnatural angle?
Every time.
And you feel horrible. I mean, It's like, to the actor's instinct, it feels so horrible because you've really planted yourself. You've worked with the arms guys.
Yeah.
You've done your lessons and your practice, and after all that, now they're trying to get the gun into the shot, but it's falser than if you were just doing cowboys and Indians and playing with a gun, and that kind of thing. Erase that now as Freddy. I could erase that, and I could bring the claw up into the frame. I could find a way to dance it into the frame and not feel intimidated by that or false, because I knew I was in this makeup, I was in this lighting, I was against this strange scenery, and it would be all right. It would be okay. Yeah. I was operating in a different reality. So I wasn't married, as opposed to having to hold a gun like this. Stick 'em up, Katee, and that does feel so bad,
Yeah, it feels so weird. How did you, after Nightmare came out, were you contracted to do more than one? Did you know you wanted to come back for more? Did Wes talk to you about that? Or were you sort of like, I'm good, I'm going to go, cleanse my palate and do something else? Or like, what was your life like after?
Well, I had been doing a big hit television show simultaneously. It's my first international hit. And also it was the one where everybody put my name to my face. And that was V. And it was my success in science fiction. And then it was a miniseries, and then another miniseries, and then a series. And it overlapped Nightmare on Elm Street. So I was really preoccupied with that, Katee, and the fame and the money. It was the first time I made any big money. And I bought my first new car and rented a place in Malibu and I was the shit. And I was sort of preoccupied with that. So I just wanted people to see the original because I felt maybe it'll become a cult classic, but I didn't think we were going to become a franchise. And then I asked them to work around my schedule for part 2 because I was still working and was doing another movie, and they gave me some grief about that. And I came in kind of like a week late on that. I think they tried to double me in a couple of scenes and they had to reshoot it. And then I finally negotiated round about part 3. That's when I got serious with it. And I just realized that I had stepped into this thing, this merry-go-round of franchise success. And a long time ago, I think, I'm not positive if I'm remembering this right, but I think Mark Hamill got some really good advice from Mel Brooks over at 20th Century Fox. And I think Mel said something to him like, kid, when you're on the merry-go-round, you don't get off till it stops, or something like that. And I remember that story. And so I just decided at some point during the making of part 3, I was going to stick with it, and I just see where this ride goes. And it wasn't for the money. Part of it was the international success. I think by then I'd already done a movie or 2 in Europe just because of Freddy.
Yeah. When was the third one filmed? When would that have been?
Maybe 87.
Okay.
Okay. 86, 87. Yeah. But it was, that whole world was opening to me, of being an international actor. Now, I was sort of a road company, Vincent Price with a little bit of Klaus Kinski thrown in, but nobody was stepping up. And I was like, yes, please, I will. Yeah. Because Nancy and I would go over and shoot a movie in Rome, or shoot a movie in London, or shoot a movie in Sicily or Romania or Hungary, Russia. I've been all over the world with work, Japan, Mexico. Wow. Obviously, you and I are in Canada all the time. But, it's really, I've done I think 14 or 15 movies overseas. And it's when you get to be my age, or even when I was in my early 50s, late 40s, it's really fun because you go back, and when you're working in Europe, it's not like you're a tourist.
Yeah.
So everybody shares their favorite little boutique hotel with you, or their favorite lakeside resort, or their favorite beach town in Europe. And it's just great. This whole world of secrets opens up to you.
Yeah, no, it's true. One of my favorite things is to be on location. I just find it it's like summer camp.
And also, you're not using the same degree of just pretend, because when you're on location, the verisimilitude is so strong. Yeah. You get out to some old gas station somewhere, or you're on a dirt road in Espanola,
yes,
walking along, with the dust devil in the background. You just know. You don't have to even act. You're just there. You're really wiping the sweat off your brow. You don't even have to think of that.
Oh yeah, true. I never really understood until I worked in New Mexico that there's so much superstition in New Mexico, and so many of those stories you hear about this thing happened on the side of this road, and it's perfectly set up for the nightmares. And I mean, I started seeing dead people when I was in New Mexico. On every road, I would be like, did you guys see that person? My brain just slowly started taking over because it's in the fabric there.
Well, there's a lot of history there, and it's very, very old. It's older than America.
Yeah.
A lot of dark history as well. But it's like I've walked into rooms before, and, you on location, and you just feel something strange. I shot in a room in St. Petersburg, Russia, that Rasputin, the mad monk, had lived in.
No.
Yeah, and it was just, and I on the Series V, I was in a morgue with Andrew Prine and Michael Ironside one night, waiting to be called for our scene. And I mean, talk about ghosts and pain. being trapped, that energy being trapped in that room. And we all took it to the set with us that night. I remember we were all a little, upset, influenced by it.
Well, you kind of let that stuff in, right? Or as I do as an actor, like that texture that you get from a set. The smells, like we just shot in an old school that was very, very old. And they had all the old photos of all the students going back to like the 40s. Like it was it was just amazing to see. And you could smell it. You could hear it. You could, you can't help but have that affect your characters.
But that's a wonderful thing as a member of the audience too. You see some shows, some films, some streaming, and you can smell it. You feel it. It comes. We in the theater, they say it comes across the footlights, but it comes through the screen. Sometimes they just get that right, and it can be palpable fear, in a thriller or a horror film, or tension in a suspense film, but it can also just be the reality of that location just seeps through. I was watching an old Brando film, The Fugitive Kind, that's based on the play Orpheus Descending. And Joanne Woodward is it's a part you could play in a New York minute, Katee. Joanne Woodward is just brilliant in it, driving around with her punk eye makeup in her old white dented Jaguar convertible, always with a little cigarette, But they filmed on location. I think it's Martin Ritt. I'm not positive. I think it was Martin Ritt, great director. But you can just feel it and smell it and sense that old South is still around in that, that moment, that, what's the word I'm looking, Gothic, Southern Gothic. That's exactly where that comes from. And it's not just a phrase that we hear in a review. Southern Gothic really means something. And when you see it or you're on location there, you feel it.
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. You spend 1 second in an old cemetery in the South, and there is just a different feeling. It's just different. You talk about fear. Is that something that were you ever like reticent to like be the thing of nightmares?
Well, I did it. I think I did the first one as kind of a challenge to a kind of boyhood fascination with horror and special effects makeup, that Lon Chaney riff I did earlier.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I did the first one. So I didn't really have trepidation. And, at some point, and I think I graduated from bad guy number 3 to bad guy number 2 to bad guy number 1 on TV. You can find me in old OG Charlie's Angels and Chips and Police Story and
oh my God, I love
Walker,
that.
Texas Rangers. I'm running around there. I'm running around with pimples in all of those shows. But at some point, I realized when I started getting bad guy number 1 parts with dialogue and stuff, that the bad guys are better written than the heroes. The guys playing the heroes have to pitch so much story and plot. This, that thing we were talking about with Kiefer Sutherland earlier, and how much plot he had was responsible for talking about in dialogue on his shows, and that he had to, what we say, pitch, sell, and so that goes along with that. That I realize the bad guys are just more fun.
I think the bad guys are easier to play, just like you said. Like, there's less pressure when you're the bad guy. You play the hero in something, oh my God. Like, it's everything's on your shoulders. You play the bad guy, you get to come in for 2 episodes and steal the show.
Yeah, Romeo is a hard part. Juliet's a hard part. But you get to play that slutty mother, Lady Capulet, or you get to play Mercutio, or Tybalt. Those are great parts. You can sink your teeth into them, yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. When you found out that you were getting the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, did you ever think that was something that would happen for you?
I have a lot of little awards over the years. And I've been nominated once or twice, for an Emmy nomination way back. And so I'm not a stranger to that.
Yeah.
But it was never in my fantasies. I thought maybe, at one point, maybe I thought early on, and this is more dream than anything, when I first started out in Hollywood, I really wanted to be like Strother Martin or Warren Oates, one of the great, character actors that we saw in the Sam Peckinpah movies and stuff. That was sort of who I thought I was going to be for a while, because I'd been typed Southern, and I'd never done a Southerner before I came to Hollywood, but I'd been typed that way. So I thought, well, maybe I'll move into Westerns and make this work for myself. Only Westerns were dying by then. And so it was like, and then I sort of found myself playing best friends and sidekicks, which is a part and parcel of the Hollywood menu. But I could see myself aging out of those, because in the old days, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, the hero would have an older sidekick. It could be Walter Brennan or Arthur O'Connell. Jimmy Stewart would be hanging out with Arthur O'Connell, or John Wayne would be hanging out with an older. And then around about Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood's buddy, is a kid. So now you had to have the kid. The leading men would have kind of the kid as a sidekick. Yeah. And I was getting older, so I thought, well, that's going to kind of go bye-bye. And so I always saw myself in this sort of featured supporting roles. I think my only fantasy was maybe I'd get nominated for a supporting role. And this was way back in the 70s. I was on a pretty good run there. But then I had, as we all have, Katee, the ones that get away.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I could tell you on one hand the ones that got away, but that I still dream about.
Which one is that? Can you talk about it? Or are you?
I came so close to the Jennifer Jason Leigh part in Hateful Eight.
Oh God!
And she was, granted, she won an Oscar. It was hers. Like that. Yeah. That was hers. But man, I wanted that.
Oh, yeah. No, it's, here, we're talking about Carl earlier. Carl and I used to lament the ones that got away together after our second glass of white wine. Carl was buying, he had a series. But yeah, I had several in the early 70s. And then I had some success, and I got 2 or 3 starring roles in a row in films. And with great actors, Jeff Bridges, Henry Fonda, Sally Field, Susan Sarandon. So by then I was confident, and I wasn't thinking about awards anymore, but just before that, having had the ones that got away, and one was, a couple of them were for television, a couple of them were for big features with huge stars. And they actually, all of them, except for the television, were flops, but I agonized. I practically had an ulcer over losing those roles, and they were flops. They didn't go anywhere. And so but it's hard to shake that desire we had, which is also, and here's a good word, Katee, that you had for Hateful Eight. You had hunger. Yeah, and that's a good thing. That's not that long ago, and you were already a phenomenally established talent in town. But for you to be hungry as recently as Hateful Eight, that's a good thing, Katee.
Yeah,
that's a positive.
When you did you get to choose the date that you get your star? Because it's Halloween.
Well, it's obvious until you realize they gave a star this year to one of my favorite directors, John Carpenter. And his remake of The Thing is one of my favorite films, some of the best practical special effects ever done, a great cast. And that movie just fools you over and over and over again. It still holds up. So I kept deferring to John. I thought John naturally would want Halloween for himself. But he took a date in the spring, And so I said,
He took Easter.
yeah, I took Easter, yeah. So I said, hey, I'll take Halloween, because I knew that a lot of people dress up on Hollywood Boulevard and in West Hollywood, and I knew it would be great for the fans, and I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if it wasn't for the fans. So this is a little way of me kind of blowing a kiss to them, you know, by kind of combining that, and that's sort of why I chose it. One of my dear old friends, it goes back to Roger Corman days, Rhett Topham, wrote the little cult film Trick or Treat with, Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne. We just lost Ozzy. But he's been a big supporter of me getting a star and everything. So it's going to be fun because I can drop his name at the ceremony and say, and by the way, you should check out Trick or Treat because it's Halloween. So I have a great connection there, which is nice to have, a kind of segue and something that connects to the holiday.
Yeah. Well, you talk about your fans and I know as well as anybody, like how much the fan base means to my career. And when did you start doing conventions? And because most people associated conventions with Star Trek for the longest time. So when was that presented to you, and when did you did you always know the fans were a huge part of your career, or was that something, that relationship you formed later?
Well, for me, it began with film festivals, and I would attend film festivals all over the world. I'd have a movie coming out, and I would get this huge fan experience would happen at a film festival, and they would always beg me. They would try to set aside a time on Sunday for me to sign autographs, and that happened to me in Brussels, and it happened to me in Spain and a couple of places. And then when I did V, which was, I felt, and you've known this now with several of your big projects, but I felt the huge attention of the science fiction audience.
Yeah.
And just how big it is and how smart they are. I mean, they know more about the show than I do. And I did my first con in New York, right across the street from the Diamond District, the old Roosevelt Hotel, and right outside is where they filmed Marathon Man with Olivier and Dustin Hoffman in that famous chase scene. And is it safe? And it was just me and William Shatner. That nobody else. And wow. I thought my line was there for V. And my line was actually longer than Bill's that day. And this is a long time ago. Bill's lines have progressively certainly gotten longer since then. But the reason my line was longer was because the head of New Line Cinema came to take me out to a fancy New York lunch. And he said, look at that. These Freddy fans are crazy. And I said, Bob, it was Robert Shea, head of New Line. I said, Bob, these people are here for V. These are my V fans. They're here for Willie, the good alien. And he goes, no, they're here for... And I said, no, Bob. And he said, come here. So we walked, and the V fans, my sci-fi fans, made it across the ballroom floor to the door. And then outside in the rain, there was 2 blocks of black leather-clad girls in corsets and punk rock makeup and guys with mohawks and dorm rats from New Jersey and heavy metal kids. And those were the Freddy fans standing in the rain. And I went, well, we're onto something here.
Yeah, the people that are going to scare the shit out of Bill Shatner.
Yeah, and I was there for free. I did that show for free.
Oh, wow.
Because I got round trip first class airfare to New York.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's all I needed. And I got taken out to a fabulous lunch at the Sherry Netherland. But
yeah.
But that was why I was just so grateful for that. And I learned at some point after Freddy versus Jason, so this is post 2005, so that's almost 20 years ago, I started to really take the cons seriously. And now I sort of pick and choose when I can where they are located somewhere I really like to go.
Yeah.
You know, New York, if they're New York adjacent or Chicago adjacent or San Francisco adjacent or New Orleans adjacent or London adjacent or Paris adjacent, those are my favorite shows.
Yeah. I love going to New Orleans.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite places. This has been really wonderful. I could literally talk to you for another 5 hours, Robert, which, we probably shouldn't do, but,
No.
I really appreciate you taking the time. We've talked to each other so many times, but we've never really sat and talked for a long period of time.
Well, Katee, I say this in all sincerity. You know, there's actors that I met and enjoyed over the years, and there's actors that I'm a fan of, living and dead. But you have been on the top of my list, and I'm both fanboy and I'm just a fellow actor who really respects your work. So I just want you to know that, and just keep showing up. The camera loves you, and you and you love it back, and that's very important.
Oh my gosh! Well, from your mouth to God's ears, because it's been a rough couple years. So this business is changing exponentially, and I think it's I've seen it. Well, you have seen it go through many different iterations over the years, and it's just trying to figure out what it's going to be.
Well, the way to look at it, I think, and you're so much younger. You need to really address this, but look for the happy surprises. Look for the happy accidents that are going to happen. And it's going to be something you're not thinking about, or something that seems perhaps unfamiliar. It might be extreme long form. You might find yourself, I would give you a cigarette and an old Burberry trench coat, and I'd put you in a Cold War miniseries in Berlin in a New York minute. You could be my spy girl.
Well, thank you. That sounds glorious. I am so excited for your star. I think that's wonderful. And, you and Nancy are, I love the fact that you guys have been married for so long. Like, you're just wonderful.
36 years.
Amazing. I love that.
Well, thanks for having me, Katee.
Absolutely. Thanks for sticking around for that whole episode. Totally appreciate you. We know that in an overcrowded podcast space, you being here means the world. So thank you so very much. I want to let you guys know that we are jumping straight into our Patreon right now, patreon.com/The Sackhoff Show. And we are going to talk all things Nightmare on Elm Street, what scares us, what's coming up, and a bit more about craft and things. And I'm going to do that with my producer and friend, Jeff Porter. So if you're interested, come see us there. If not, it's okay. We love you anyway, and we will see you next Tuesday. And that's what's up.